Are you ready for a story where a deadly planetary meltdown, a forbidden alien bond, and a daring escape against all odds collide in one explosive narrative? In this tale, we've witnessed Sergeant Ethan Drake rescue a paralyzed Lyran warrior, Rhiannon Lore, only for them to forge a life-altering connection that no one thought possible. Their fight to escape Arcturus 9, caught between rampaging Dranids and a ticking reactor meltdown, forms the most thrilling centerpiece of this adventure. Curious about how these unlikely allies manage to pull off the impossible and what happens after their narrow escape? Stick around and immerse yourself in the full story to discover the stunning conclusion. If you enjoy epic sci-fi and heroic exploits, please subscribe to our channel to support us and be the first to hear more amazing stories. Buckle up, it's one wild ride. A single scorched battle flag fluttered in the acidic wind as Sergeant Ethan Drake surveyed the aftermath of the latest planetary assault on Arcturus 9. This remote outpost was never designed to withstand the full fury of the Dranids, those ruthless exobiological invaders who specialized in swarm tactics and brute force. The once formidable base now lay in pieces around him. Twisted metal beams jutted out of cratered earth, and what remained of the perimeter fences crackled with failing energy fields. Smoke rose in ragged columns from the debris of fallen bunkers, assault vehicles, and shattered artillery placements. The stench of ozone mingled with the cloying tang of alien fluids, forcing Ethan to tighten the filters on his respirator. His boots, reinforced with a polymer shell that could resist Dranid acid, crunched through shards of what used to be automated turrets. In the distance, the flicker of residual plasma discharges illuminated the swirling dust, casting eerie shadows across the remains of his platoon's forward command post. It was unnervingly silent now, and every step Ethan took seemed to echo an accusation against this wasted battlefield. As far as he could tell, he was the only survivor of the 72nd Earth Infantry after the Dranids' final onslaught. His team had been so certain they could hold this post. They had the terrain advantage and advanced Earth weaponry, Mark 7 plasmic rifles, rocket drones, and anti-orbital cannons. But all the technology in the galaxy could not prevent a catastrophic breach once the Dranids had outnumbered them 20-1. The memory of those frantic last moments burned in his mind. Hearing his comrades' screams over the comms as monstrous exoskeletal warriors swarmed the trenches, ripping through men and machines alike with savage precision. Now, in the grim calm that followed, he felt the isolation like a physical weight on his chest. Protocol demanded that he regroup with any surviving squads or, failing that, attempt to establish communications with the High Command for extraction. But his console, strapped across his forearm, showed nothing but static. The Dranids had jammed or destroyed every beacon in the region before retreating. Checking for survivors was a risk, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to leave without at least a cursory search. Giving up on his people, on some slim hope of rescue, just felt wrong. He didn't make it through 2 tours in this galaxy-spanning war to slink off and hide in a crater until his oxygen ran out. If there was one thing Ethan Drake had in abundance, it was stubborn tenacity, an Earth-born trait that had kept him alive through more near-death scrapes than he cared to count. So he walked, weaving through twisted machinery and pools of luminescent alien blood that burned faint holes in the metal plating. He kept his Mark 7 rifle held tight, its standard-issue power cell humming lightly against his shoulder. Despite the devastation, the weapon's familiar vibration gave him something solid to cling to, a lifeline of normalcy in a scene of utter desolation. His suit's sensor array flickered, reading minimal life signs in the immediate area. Just as he was about to dismiss it as a glitch, the display registered something definitely alive, a faint, erratic signal, close by. Heart pounding, Ethan pressed himself against the remains of a collapsed barrier wall. He had to see if it was another human soldier or perhaps a Dranid straggler. Cautiously, Ethan stepped over the contorted remains of an autocannon and peeked around a damaged troop transport. Half submerged under fallen plating and collapsed concrete lay a figure he immediately recognized as alien, but not Dranid. The being's skin was a smoky, porcelain hue, shimmering with an almost iridescent quality in the hazy sunlight. Her hair, a metallic platinum, fanned out over the ground like a spilled swirl of moonlight. From the patches of tattered uniform that still clung to her, Ethan realized she was a member of the Lyran warrior caste. The Lyrans were among humanity's most stalwart allies, known for their agile battlefield tactics and advanced psionic technology. Even so, they were not invincible, and this warrior looked dangerously close to death. He approached with measured steps, the old soldier's caution reminding him that it could be a trap. But the closer he got, the more he saw that she was barely breathing, her eyes shut, her limbs unnaturally twisted beneath a section of collapsed plating. A quick glance at his wrist console confirmed a badly fragmented spinal column, a dire reading that made his stomach drop. She was paralyzed from the lower back down, perhaps permanent if not treated soon. "Hey," he said, lowering his rifle just enough to show he wasn't a threat. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered at the sound of his voice, revealing pupils that shone like polished iron. "You human?" she managed, her voice tinged with a lilting accent that was unmistakably Lyran. "Go! Save yourself!" She coughed, her breath rattling. "I can't feel my legs." Ethan knelt beside her, his mind racing through standard battlefield triage. They were deep in hostile territory, and military protocol was explicit. In a tactical withdrawal, immobile casualties were to be left behind if there was no immediate evacuation. Resources had to be conserved for those who could still fight. His training said to mark her coordinates and move on. But looking at her, alone and wounded, with that defiant glimmer of life still in her eyes, he couldn't do it. Whatever else this war had stripped from him, he still believed in the code of leaving no one behind. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly, pressing a hand against a section of debris pinning her down. "Name's Sergeant Ethan Drake, Earth Infantry. What's yours?" She hesitated as if the very act of speaking was an effort. "Rhiannon Lore, Lyran 3rd Strike Force." Another coughing fit seized her, and Ethan grimaced, worried about internal injuries. "If you stay, you'll die." "You're not the first person to tell me that," Ethan replied, a faint grin twitching at his lips. With great care, he began shifting debris off her torso. Let's prove them wrong. He had to fight the urge to jolt her free. One wrong move and he could worsen her spinal injury. Instead, he used every ounce of augmented strength in his gauntlets to methodically remove the panels crushing her. The structure was heavier than it looked, forcing him to angle his body in such a way that he could lever it off without jarring her too harshly. The process took agonizing minutes, during which Rhiannon barely made a sound, her features contorted in pain, but her pride keeping her silent. Finally, Ethan managed to pry off the last slab of metal, revealing Rhiannon's full injuries. A deep gash down her left arm, cuts along her legs, and a collapsed section of her combat suit that hinted at serious internal trauma. She looked up at him, her gray ironed eyes flickering with exhausted relief. "Thanks," she muttered. "I'd salute you, but I'm pretty sure I can't move my legs or my left arm." "We'll handle that," Ethan said. He carefully shifted her onto a flatter piece of plating, sliding his arms under her with the gentleness of a combat medic. "I'll get you to shelter. Figure out a plan." Rhiannon let out a shaky breath as Ethan lifted her. Lyran armor was known for being lightweight yet durable, but in her weakened state, it felt as if she weighed a ton. He braced his boots against the fractured ground and pulled her against his chest. "You humans," she whispered, voice tinged with irony. "Sometimes you do the most illogical things." "That's probably the only reason we haven't gone extinct yet," Ethan quipped, scanning the area with his rifle sensor. It pinged a set of movement signatures about 100 yards out. The Dronids were regrouping, or perhaps just scouring the battlefield for survivors. Either way, the two of them were in no shape for a direct confrontation. Ethan's visor displayed a partial map of the ravaged compound, indicating a collapsed corridor that might offer cover. He adjusted his grip on Rhiannon and stepped carefully over piles of rubble, the loose soil giving way underfoot. The entire area looked as if it could give out at any second, especially with the mild aftershocks from orbital strikes still shaking the planet's crust. As they moved, Rhiannon forced out a few words of Lyran Field's strategy. "Dronids, they patrol in wide arcs. Use flankers to corner stragglers," she murmured. "We have to anticipate hidden sentries." Ethan nodded, keeping his rifle up. "I'll keep watch for scuttlers." The Dronids' smaller infantry units, often called scuttlers by Earth troops, were known for scaling walls and ceilings with their multi-jointed limbs, ambushing unsuspecting survivors. You just focus on staying alive. Alive but crippled, she said bitterly, wincing as Ethan stumbled over a piece of twisted rebar. I'm no good to you. He pressed his lips together. He didn't have time for an argument, nor did he have any illusions about how dire her condition was. Standard field medkits might stabilize a broken leg or patch a plasma burn, but they couldn't mend a nearly severed spine. Rhiannon Lore needed advanced Lyran medical tech or a specialized Earth med unit, and there was precious little of either to be found. Their only chance might be finding an operational med station or a downed evac shuttle. The odds of that were next to none, but Ethan had to try. At least the Dronids weren't launching a full-scale second wave. Yet. He paused to assess a battered corridor that led deeper into the ruined base. Overhead, twisted girders hung like broken ribs, their structural integrity questionable at best. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling sweat bead on his brow despite the climate controls in his helmet. We push forward. Keep low, he told Rhiannon. Try not to draw attention. If we see trouble, we find cover. She nodded weakly. If you can just get me behind a sealed door or a bunker, you can still slip away. There was no pity in her voice, just resignation. You're coming with me, Ethan said, letting his annoyance bleed through. End of discussion. And though Rhiannon said nothing in return, he felt her slender fingers tighten imperceptibly on his shoulder, a small sign of trust, or maybe gratitude. They made their way down what had once been the base's main corridor, though calling it a corridor now was charitable. The walls were riddled with energy scorches, entire sections caved in, exposing wiring and conduits that sparked in the dim light. Every so often, a shriek of metal overhead sent dust cascading down on them, forcing Ethan to move faster. He kept an ear out for the clicking, chittering speech of the Dranids, which often signaled a patrol close by. Rhiannon's breathing was shallow, her battered body obviously straining. The Lyran warrior caste were legendary for their resilience, but severe spinal trauma was no small matter. Ethan considered their limited resources: 2 half-charged plasma cells, a single fragmentation grenade, and a standard-issue field med kit that might as well have been a child's bandage kit in the face of her injuries. If they ran into even a small pack of Dranids, they'd be hard-pressed to hold them off. Despite the precariousness of their situation, Rhiannon offered the occasional strategic comment, pointing out vantage points or ways to bypass collapsed sections. It was as though her tactical knowledge was coded into her very instincts, her heritage as a Lyran warrior shining through even when her body failed her. Ethan found himself admiring her grit. Most people would be unconscious or delirious by now, but she remained laser-focused on survival, albeit with a wry acceptance of her physical state. At one point, they were forced to take shelter behind a toppled communications console as the corridor suddenly lit up with the glow of Dronid plasma rifles. A scouting party marched through the side passage. Ethan could see their sleek, chitinous limbs and elongated heads, the front carapace marked with phosphorescent glyphs that identified their hive. Holding his breath, he could hear their guttural clicks echoing against the broken walls. He gripped his own rifle tightly, ready to defend Rhiannon to his last plasma bolt if necessary. But the Dronids passed by, apparently more focused on securing the outer perimeter than scouring the guts of the base. Ethan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of relief and an equal dose of dread, because if the Dronids had the run of this facility, any chance of rescue or salvage was basically nil. The enemy was thorough. They would destroy or repurpose any piece of technology they deemed useful. He turned to Rhiannon. We can't keep playing cat and mouse. If we don't find a safe zone soon, we'll be cut off. She lifted her gaze, eyes scanning the darkness. The Lyrans installed some forward operating modules during a joint operation with Earth about 2 weeks ago. If any of those modules are intact, they might house advanced Lyran medical pods. Her words triggered a faint spark of hope in Ethan. Earth and Lyran forces had been trying to integrate technologies for months, though success was limited. Still, a single medical pod, if functional, would give Rhiannon a chance. Where would these modules be? Toward the southwestern sector, she replied. Beneath the manufacturing wing, there was talk of a secure vault. Ethan exhaled slowly. The southwestern sector was at least 300 meters from here, possibly more if they had to zigzag through collapsed corridors. But it was still better than wandering aimlessly. We'll try it, he said. Hold on. Carrying Rhiannon through the battered maze of the southwestern sector took an excruciating amount of time. Each corridor they traversed seemed more treacherous than the last, cluttered with half-collapsed beams and gaping holes in the floor. Occasionally, flickers of emergency lighting revealed a fleeting glimpse of the larger devastation. Consoles ripped open, data servers smashed, and entire sections riddled with the distinctive burn marks of Dranid acid weaponry. All the while, Ethan listened for signs of pursuit. The Dranids would eventually tighten their patrol routes, if they hadn't already. His only advantage, ironically, was that the base was so thoroughly destroyed that even the Dranids seemed hesitant to delve into its deeper levels. More than once, he had to carefully step around or climb over the remains of Earth and Lyran soldiers alike, a grim reminder of how little mercy the enemy had shown. Despite her pain, Rhiannon kept up a steady commentary to guide him. She pointed out structural weaknesses so he wouldn't mistakenly walk under a beam ready to collapse. She suggested vantage points from which to scout ahead. It impressed Ethan how a half-paralyzed warrior could still maintain the sharp focus of a seasoned tactician. Some part of him wondered about her rank among the Lyran Third Strike Force. Was she a captain, a scout, or something else entirely? He hoped to find out later if they made it out alive. Finally, they reached a section that looked more intact than the rest. A wide blast door, nearly buckled in the middle, blocked their path to what might have once been a storage wing. Rhiannon gestured to a panel on the wall, though her left arm trembled with the effort. Try bypassing the door circuit. Lyran modules might be behind this. Ethan set her down gently against a relatively stable slab of debris, then pried open the control panel. Wires spilled out like synthetic veins. The Lyran scripting on the circuit boards was unfamiliar to him, but he recognized enough universal symbols to attempt a manual override. Sparks flew as he rerouted power, forcing the door's mechanical gears to grind open about a meter before they jammed completely. He slipped through the gap, then pulled Rhiannon in after him. The room beyond was in slightly better shape. Flickering overhead lights revealed a cluster of crates marked with both Earth and Lyran insignias. Most of them were scorched or toppled, but a few remained sealed. Ethan's heart lifted at the sight of stacked medical supplies, though he had no illusions about how advanced they might be. Regular field kits wouldn't mend a severed spine. Check the far side, Rhiannon said, her breath catching. I can sense Lyran energy signatures, possibly a medical chamber. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Sense it? She offered a faint, pained smile. Lyran warriors have limited psionic capabilities, especially attuned to our own tech. It's not as mystical as humans assume, more like an extra sense. Nodding, Ethan approached the far corner of the storage room. A heavy curtain of twisted metal and partially collapsed ceiling formed a makeshift barrier, beyond which he spotted a softly glowing console. When he cleared away the debris, his pulse spiked. There stood a Lyran healing pod, intact beneath a canopy of broken beams. The curved, crystalline surface shimmered with faint internal lights. Unbelievable, Ethan breathed, motioning for Rhiannon to see. He quickly went back to lift her in his arms. The Lyran warrior's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the healing chamber, and he felt a surge of relief. Finally, some real hope. Will this thing fix your spine? He asked, stepping gingerly around the fallen supports. Rhiannon let out a shaky breath. It's one of our advanced healing capsules beyond the typical med pods you might know. We call it a Vitraxis chamber. It doesn't merely mend tissue, it can reconnect neural pathways. But what? Ethan pressed, refusing to let his hope fizzle. She looked away, her pale hair brushing her face. Vitraxis technology requires a, how do I put this, cooperative resonance. Typically, a Lyran medic or a close relative helps guide the energy flow. Without someone intimately bonded, it can be dangerous, even fatal. The synergy might not form correctly, or it could go haywire. Ethan swallowed, glancing at the chamber's controls. This was no ordinary piece of tech. So, you need another Lyran to operate it with you? Yes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. In a triage scenario, we often pair wounded warriors with a family member or designated caretaker. The chamber merges biometrics, mental patterns, everything. It can even alter genetic structure to complete the healing. For a moment, neither spoke. The room flickered under the failing lights, throwing their shadows against the walls like wraiths. Ethan knew the drowneds could be closing in, that at any second a swarm could breach those storage room doors. Yet here they stood with a machine that was a potential miracle, if only they could unlock it. "What if I try?" he said quietly, bracing himself for an inevitable protest. Rhiannon's eyes narrowed. "You're human. It's not designed for you. The chamber might misread your physiology, or you could disrupt mine, leading to catastrophic failure." "Still a better shot than leaving you here," he replied, setting her gently on the floor. "If we don't do anything, you'll die from your injuries or be captured by drowneds. And I'm not letting that happen." She stared at him for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. He could almost sense the internal conflict behind those metallic eyes, a proud warrior hesitating to entrust her life and possibly her very genetic code to an alien stranger. "Ethan, if the synergy forms, it's permanent. There could be side effects we can't predict. Lyran biology is notoriously sensitive to psionic imprints." He placed a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "We don't have time for caution, Rhiannon. I'd rather risk the unknown than watch you die. Call me stubborn, call me foolish, but I'm carrying you into that chamber." Her expression softened, and he felt the faint tremor of her hand as she lifted it to cover his. "You truly are reckless, Sergeant Drake." A pause, followed by the smallest smile. "All right, let's see if the Vitraxis chamber will have mercy on a Lyran human pair." With the last vestiges of her strength, Rhiannon guided Ethan through the chamber's activation protocols. The console's holographic interface flickered to life, displaying swirling Lyran script that formed elegant spirals across the glass. Her voice, weak but steady, instructed him which icons to press, which energy levels to stabilize. Sparks shot from an overloaded panel, forcing Ethan to maneuver around it while holding her. In the center of the curved unit, a translucent cocoon, large enough for two, began to glow from within. A quiet hum reverberated through the storage room, rising to a resonance that vibrated the walls. Despite the chaos, Ethan found a surreal calm washing over him, as though the chamber's energies were already probing his own biosignals. He gently set Rhiannon inside. A faint swirl of luminous fluid filled the bottom of the cocoon, supporting her body in a zero-gravity cradle. Her eyes fluttered as she tried to stay conscious. We both have to be inside," she reminded him, voice trembling. "If the synergy is to work, it needs contact from both participants." Ethan nodded, unfastening the clamps on his rifle and letting it drop to the floor of the storage room. He removed key segments of his armor to keep the Vitraxis from short-circuiting on the alloys. With one last glance at the battered door, still quiet for now, he climbed into the cocoon alongside her. A soft glow rippled across his vision. The fluid rose to envelop them, warm yet strangely weightless, as if charged with static. Rhiannon's face was inches from his, her metallic hair floating around her in a shimmering halo. He steadied her head in his hand. "We're good," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. The chamber sealed shut with a faint hiss. Immediately, Ethan felt a surge of energy, like a low electrical current drifting across his skin. It crept from his arms, up his neck, and into his skull, forming what could only be described as a mental link. His awareness blurred, and suddenly he could sense Rhiannon's presence in his mind. Her pain, her fierce determination, her fear of losing her identity. He also felt the Vitraxis scanning him, forging connections between their neural pathways. Alien symbols and ghostly impressions flashed behind his eyelids, and a tidal wave of sensations threatened to overwhelm him. At the same time, Rhiannon gasped, her body arching as if being jolted back to life. Through this growing bond, he perceived the extent of her injuries, glimpsing the raw nerve endings in her spinal cord that screamed with pain. Yet gradually something else took hold, a gentle, soothing force that knitted and mended. The fluid glowed brighter, forming arcs of light that pulsed in time with their synchronized heartbeats. As the synergy strengthened, Ethan felt a sense of unity he'd never experienced before, as if their minds were carefully merging threads of consciousness. In that strange timelessness, he saw fragments of her memories, training in Lyran fortresses under alien skies, forging her energy blade in a sacred ceremony. He felt her brush against his own recollections, his enlistment on Earth, The day he first fired a Mark 7, the loss of friends in distant battles. Then, with a final surge of energy, the Vitraxis flared brilliantly. Both of them cried out as the synergy spiked, searing a permanent imprint into their genes, their minds, and perhaps their very souls. The light subsided, leaving the chamber's interior awash in a glowing haze. Gasping for breath, Ethan looked into Rhiannon's eyes and saw flecks of his own earth brown in her once metallic irises. Whatever lines had separated them before had been irrevocably blurred. Outside, the base shuddered from a distant explosion, but inside the Vitraxis, they were calm, interwoven, and very much alive. Rhiannon twitched her toes, those same toes that had been paralyzed. With dawning awe, she realized the chamber had fulfilled its purpose. She could move, though everything about her body felt altered. So did Ethan's. The synergy was complete. The Vitraxis chamber slowly powered down, bathing the cramped storage vault in a cool ambient glow. Sergeant Ethan Drake's first sensation was an overwhelming closeness to Rhiannon Lore, as if he could still feel her breath and heartbeat in his own chest. Disentangling that shared awareness wasn't easy. Every time he tried to think of his next move, impressions of her memories or emotions nudged at his mind. It felt like learning to pilot a new vehicle. The controls were there, but alien in design. The healing fluid drained away and the transparent dome lifted. Fresh air, tinged with the acrid scent of scorched metal, poured in. Ethan gingerly helped Rhiannon sit up. She tested her legs, eyes wide with astonishment when her toes moved on command. "Unbelievable," she murmured, standing cautiously. She swayed, nearly toppling, and he braced her with one arm. Through this new mental link, he felt a flicker of gratitude mixed with stubborn pride. "I take it that's a good sign," Ethan said, stepping out of the chamber. He felt like he'd run a marathon. His arms trembled, and his mind buzzed as though someone had rewired his neurons. "You look steady enough, but we should get moving before the Dranids come knocking." Rhiannon gave him a faint nod, carefully stretching her limbs. The tears and scorch marks in her Lyran armor seemed strangely out of place now that her internal injuries had been mended. She shot him a glance that was equal parts curiosity and concern. "I can feel you, Ethan," she said quietly, pressing a hand against her temple. Not just in the sense of empathy, an actual bond. The Vitraxis was never intended to integrate two different species, yet here we are. "That makes two of us," he replied. A phantom warmth still lingered where the fluid had touched him. "I'm picking up flashes. Your childhood training, your forging ceremony, it's surreal." Their moment of reverent confusion ended as the floor quaked with a distant explosion. Rhiannon grabbed one of the crates to steady herself. Ethan peered at his helmet's sensor readings, which were flickering with life signs and occasional pockets of Dranid movement. "We should expect hostiles within minutes," he announced, picking up his rifle. Rhiannon inspected her own weapon, a Lyran energy blade with a handle embedded with luminous crystals. Though it had been knocked from her during the initial battle, she spotted it now, half buried under a collapsed girder. Reclaiming it, she activated the weapon with a flick of her wrist, the blade humming to life in a shimmering arc of pale light. "Still functional," she noted, relief evident in her voice. Just then, Ethan felt a sudden jolt, like a reflex but originating from Rhiannon's consciousness. His rifle hand jerked in response, lifting to aim at the door. A flicker of motion in the corridor beyond signaled the approach of Dranid patrols. He realized in that instant what had happened. Her Lyran reflexes were flooding into him through their bond, giving him warnings faster than his human instincts could register. Rhiannon's eyes widened in confirmation. "Our synergy isn't just emotional. It's carrying my muscle memory, my combat reflexes." "That's handy," Ethan said, a half grin forming. Though the situation was dire, he couldn't help feeling a spark of excitement. If this alien bond gave them a tactical edge, it might be their best shot at survival. They moved out from the storage wing with a new sense of purpose. Every step Ethan took seemed synced with Rhiannon's subtle body language, as if they were dancing to an unheard rhythm. When she shifted her weight to check a corner, his body reflexively mirrored the motion, aligning his rifle to cover the same angle. It was unnerving at first, like a puppet show where they were each other's puppeteers. But it also felt strangely natural, an extension of the trust that had already formed between them. The corridor they entered had partially collapsed, leaving a narrow passage flanked by broken pipes. Condensation and coolant dripped from the overhead rupture, forming puddles that reflected the dancing sparks of exposed wires. Rhiannon took point this time, her energy blade lighting the dim space. They reached a section where the roof had caved in, allowing a shaft of pale sunlight to stream down into the gloom. Dust motes swirled in the beam, and the pungent smell of the battlefield outside wafted in. Ethan paused, checking his sensor once more. Now that Rhiannon was upright, his field med kit data also registered her vital signs. "Your heart rate is stabilizing," he said softly, marveling at how the readout seamlessly integrated with her biometrics. "You're healing fast, even by Lyran standards." "Must be the synergy," she replied, a hint of relief coloring her voice. "The Vitraxis probably triggered an ongoing regenerative effect, but I'm still getting used to your presence in my head." He felt a flicker of self-consciousness echo through their link, her unspoken realization that he could sense more than just her physical well-being. Choosing to ignore it, he instead focused on the next objective, escaping the labyrinth of wreckage and finding a secure location to call for extraction. Or if that failed, forging their own path off this ravaged planet. Suddenly, a metallic scraping noise reverberated behind a massive chunk of fallen wall. Both of them tensed. Through the gap in the debris, they spotted two Dranids moving in formation, long insectoid limbs scraping the floor, plasma rifles slung over their bony shoulders. Their compound eyes glowed an eerie turquoise in the low light. "Ready?" Ethan whispered, feeling an adrenaline spike race through his veins. Oddly, he felt a second surge as well. Rhiannon's battle readiness mirrored in his own nerves. "On your mark," she replied in his mind, not needing to speak aloud. They sprang into action with uncanny precision. Ethan swung around, snapping off two quick plasma shots that found their targets with lethal accuracy. Meanwhile, Rhiannon vaulted over a smaller pile of debris, her blade slicing through the second Dranid's rifle before it could aim. She followed up with a sharp thrust that dropped the alien to the floor, its chitinous plating split in a burst of phosphorescent fluid. The encounter ended in seconds. Ethan and Rhiannon exchanged a look, equal parts relief and awe. They had fought side by side for less than a minute, yet it felt as though they'd practiced drills for years. "I'm starting to think we might be unstoppable together," he said, voice still hushed. "Focus, Sergeant," Rhiannon replied, though a wry smile ghosted across her lips. "Arcturus 9 is still swarming with Dranids, and we have no extraction plan." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Right. Let's see if we can find a command center, or at least a working comm station. The base data might still be intact somewhere." They pressed deeper into the base, navigating the tangled corridors and battered wings with renewed urgency. Each step brought them closer to the central command complex, if it still stood. In the days leading up to the final assault, the command center had been the nerve hub for both Earth and Lyran forces, outfitted with advanced communications arrays and strategic planning modules. If any equipment remained functional, it might be there. The synergy between Ethan and Rhiannon manifested in subtle ways. At one point, Rhiannon detected a faint hum in the walls, an energy conduit about to overload, and they rerouted to avoid a catastrophic explosion. Another time, Ethan sensed through her that a narrow vent shaft might offer a shortcut, and though it felt claustrophobic to crawl through dark, cramped metal spaces, they shaved off valuable time. Despite these advantages, the tension weighed heavily on them. Every so often, they heard distant bursts of gunfire or roars of collapsing infrastructure. Once, they nearly stumbled into a squad of Dranids gathering supplies from a half-demolished armory. Huddling behind a fallen column, they listened as the aliens communicated in rapid clicks, presumably discussing what to salvage. Fortunately, the Dranids remained unaware of their hidden observers and soon moved on. Ethan took the opportunity to ask in a quiet mental voice, "Are you feeling anything odd?" He wasn't quite sure how to phrase it, but something about his internal state had changed. Beyond the heightened reflexes and shared mental link, he sensed a deep shift within his own physiology, like a piece of him no longer felt purely human. Rhiannon, kneeling beside him, cast him a sidelong glance. "Yes, the Vitraxis might have altered more than my injuries. My body, it's adjusting to your genetic code, and yours to mine. I can't be certain of the long-term effects." A flash of concern rippled through him. They were in uncharted territory, physically and biologically. A fleeting notion crossed his mind. Had they just triggered some irreversible process that could threaten their own lives, or worse, create diplomatic chaos between Earth and Lyran leadership? It was one thing to heal a warrior's spine. It was another to fuse two species on a genetic level. But the immediate concern of survival overshadowed these worries. They resumed their silent trek toward the command center, moving as one. Occasionally, Rhiannon would pause mid-stride, tilting her head as if listening to an inaudible frequency, her Lyran senses aided by their bond. Ethan, in turn, felt sparks of her tactical brilliance ignite in his brain, prompting him to visualize vantage points and lines of sight as if he'd studied them for years. They reached a massive circular corridor that ringed the heart of the base. The walls were scorched, the ceiling sagging in places, but a large set of double doors still stood at the far end. An overhead sign, half hanging by sparking cables, identified it as Central Command Operations. Ethan's breath caught. If the doors still functioned, or if they could be forced open, the command center might hold everything they needed to call for backup. And if not, it might at least be defensible. Approaching the double doors, they found the control panel smashed and blackened. Rhiannon studied the structure, lips pressed into a tight line. This doesn't bode well. The Draenids might have destroyed anything of value inside, or worse, turned it into a trap. Let's be optimistic, Ethan replied, though his voice held little of it. He examined the battered mechanisms. They were jammed tight, partially fused. Might have to do this the old-fashioned way. He slung his rifle, dug his fingers into the gap, and heaved. The metal groaned but refused to budge. Rhiannon stepped up beside him, placing one hand atop his. Through the synergy, Ethan felt a sudden surge of strength course between them, as if her neural impetus was amplifying his muscular effort. Together they pried the doors apart, inch by agonizing inch, until there was just enough room to squeeze through. Beyond lay the ruined heart of the command center. Burnt-out consoles lined the walls, many of them shattered by explosions or riddled with holes from Dronid plasma. The air smelled of charred circuitry and melted plastic. Sparks flickered from severed cables that hung like mechanical vines. A faint emergency light glowed from the far side of the room, where a central, strategic display table loomed like a forlorn monument. Ethan recognized the design, an integrated Earth-Lyran interface meant to coordinate large-scale battles. To see it in such a state triggered a pang of guilt and loss in him. They had been so close to establishing a meaningful alliance. Over there, Rhiannon said, pointing to a partially intact console near the back. It still has power. They stepped around overturned chairs and fragments of twisted metal, picking their way through debris that crackled underfoot. At first glance, the console's screen was fractured in several places. But when Ethan tapped a button, it emitted a weak beep. The lights flickered, revealing a minimal operating menu. "Com array. Offline," he muttered, squinting at the half-legible text. "Satellite link. Destroyed. Local transmissions. Jammed." Rhiannon clenched her fists. "So we're still cut off." "Not entirely." Ethan tapped another section. "Internal network nodes might still be functional in some sublevels. If we can patch into a short-range corridor, we could piggyback a signal off any surviving Lyran beacon." Her face lit with cautious hope. It's a slim chance, but better than nothing. Before they could investigate further, an alarm shrieked from somewhere in the complex. The emergency lights strobed red, and the console spat out garbled text that Ethan struggled to interpret. Rhiannon, however, seemed to decode enough to grimace. "Dronid infiltration in the central complex. They've triggered a meltdown sequence in the power grid, perhaps unintentionally or to flush out survivors." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You're saying the base might be set to blow?" She nodded, a dark seriousness settling in her gaze. "We don't have long. A meltdown in the main reactors would vaporize this entire sector. We either find a way out, or we're dust." A frantic beep on the console alerted them to incoming movement. Through the synergy link, Ethan felt Rhiannon's pulse spike in tandem with his own. The data feed displayed multiple Dronid life signs converging on their position. They'd drawn attention. Ethan inhaled, mind racing. "Can we just outrun the meltdown, or do we need to stop it?" "Stopping it would be nearly impossible without a functioning control substation," Rhiannon said. Our best bet is to escape before everything goes critical. But a meltdown might also block off the Dranids. If they sense what's happening, they'll either flee or push toward us in desperation. In that moment, they both realized that without an escape route off-planet, fleeing the meltdown was just delaying the inevitable. Their synergy crackled with shared dread. "We might need to get creative," Ethan said, stepping back from the console. "Maybe find an underground hangar or a shuttle bay with some battered craft we can jury-rig." Their best lead came from a partial map still flickering on the console's display. Though half the data was corrupted, it hinted at a small, auxiliary hangar below the command center, one used primarily by Lyran strike teams for rapid insertion. If that area was still intact, a stealth transport or shuttle might remain hidden there. Rhiannon pointed to the route indicated by the damaged blueprint, a narrow staircase leading down to sub-level corridors, then branching off into maintenance tunnels. It's likely the Dranids haven't fully explored those tunnels. The meltdown countdown might be messing with their scanners. We'll have to be quick. Let's move. Ethan scooped up whatever supply pouches weren't destroyed, including a battered multi-tool set and a half-used spool of fiber cord. Rhiannon patted down her armor, grimacing at its condition, but grateful the Vitraxis had restored her mobility. They slipped out of the command center, moving with heightened caution. At times, the synergy made it feel as though they shared a single nervous system, reacting to sudden noises or flickers of movement in perfect unison. The strobing emergency lights turned the corridors into a hellish kaleidoscope of red flashes and deep shadows. Midway down a stairwell, the entire base shook violently. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and somewhere below, machinery groaned under immense stress. Ethan nearly lost his footing, but Rhiannon steadied him, their bond flaring with mutual alarm. "Reactor instability is rising," she relayed, her mental voice laced with urgency. They reached the sub-level, which was mercifully free of immediate Dranid patrols. Twisted piping ran along the walls, most of it venting steam or fluid. A pungent chemical odor burned Ethan's nostrils. In the distance, he heard the faint hiss of a Dranid communicator. With silent gestures, they pressed themselves against the wall, edging forward inch by inch. Ahead, a T-junction branched in two directions. The left passage seemed partially collapsed, the right one intact but ominously dark. The synergy fed them a rapid exchange of possibilities. Rhiannon sensed Dranid heat signatures to the left, possibly trapped behind rubble. Ethan perceived a faint flicker of overhead lighting to the right, suggesting a functional corridor. They chose the right path, creeping along the corridor's perimeter. As they advanced, Ethan's visor crackled with interference. Random signals that made no sense. Every few feet, his heads-up display flickered, replaced by odd glyphs. He realized it was some form of Lyran script, not from Rhiannon but from deeper within the facility. Something in Rhiannon's posture went rigid. "I can feel it too." "That's a Lyran distress call. Old frequency but still active. Could be an automated beacon." Ethan's heart quickened. If it's automated, we might piggyback off the signal, or maybe it's a link to the auxiliary hangar. They followed the signs, which led them to a sealed hatch near the end of the corridor. The door was smaller than the massive ones above, clearly intended as a service entrance. A panel on the wall blinked with Lyran text. Rhiannon tapped through the options, her face grim. "It's some sort of fallback station. The beacon's behind here." With a hiss of pressurized air, the hatch unlocked. Inside, they found a modest chamber filled with rows of console panels bearing the swirling designs of Lyran engineering. At its center stood something like a medical kiosk, except it pulsed with a soft, living glow. The kiosk reminded Ethan of the Vitraxis chamber. Same sleek lines, same crystalline interfaces, though on a smaller scale. Rhiannon approached it cautiously, placing a hand against the translucent casing. It's a Lyran engineering node, designed to interface with high-level psionic commands. I've heard rumors we experimented with combining it with Earth's digital frameworks. She paused, her gaze drifting to Ethan. A sudden wave of apprehension passed through their link. "This technology, it might interface with our synergy in unexpected ways," she warned mentally. "It's scanning us already." Ethan could feel it too, a gentle probing at the edges of his consciousness, like tiny filaments of light reaching out to sample his biosignature. He recalled how the Vitraxis had felt, But this was less invasive, more a curious whisper than a forceful bond. "We need to try," he said aloud, stepping forward. "If this thing can help us bypass Drana jammers and reach an evac vessel, it's worth the risk." Rhiannon nodded, though a tremor of anxiety rippled through her as she activated the kiosk. Lines of Lyran script danced across its surface. A hiss of energy emanated from beneath the floor, and the entire sublevel lighting flickered. Panels around the walls came online one by one, revealing a swirling tapestry of diagnostic data. Ethan recognized some Earth-based symbols interwoven with the Lyran text. This place was a prototype integration site, a covert project perhaps, testing whether Lyran psionics could meld with human digital architecture. If so, they'd been on the brink of a technological breakthrough before the Dranids' assault. "Look," he said, tapping one of the panels. A rotating schematic of the base's lower hangar emerged, accompanied by flickering notations in both English and Lyran. A single craft was highlighted, a small, sleek ship with dual-labeled parts. "That must be the stealth transport." Rhiannon's eyes lit up with recognition. "Yes, the Starstrike class. Lyran design but fitted with Earth's jump drives for short-range hops. Coordinates show it's just a few corridors away," Ethan noted, pointing at the map. "But the meltdown timer is still running, and the Dranids are thick in this sector. We'll have to move fast." Before they could exit, a surge of light from the kiosk made them both freeze. Energy lines snaked across the floor, weaving around their feet. Rhiannon stiffened, pressing a hand to her stomach. A wave of dizziness swept over Ethan, causing him to sway. He gasped, feeling a flutter of new awareness through their synergy. Rhiannon's eyes went wide as she stumbled forward. Ethan caught her, and through their bond, he sensed a startling discovery blooming in her mind, a sense of something new and fragile forming deep within. "No," she breathed, her voice shaking. "It's not possible." Ethan felt it too, an impossible presence, like a delicate flame, yet unmistakably alive. He couldn't even form the words. Their synergy wasn't merely blending minds, it was forging life. They both understood in that instant. Rhiannon Lore was pregnant, their genetics interwoven by the Vitraxis chamber. The kiosk had merely confirmed what their bond was already telling them. Shock mingled with awe as Rhiannon pressed a trembling hand to her abdomen. Though outwardly she looked unchanged, her Lyran physiology was advanced enough to detect the earliest spark of creation, especially with a mental link that included Ethan. "How can this be so fast?" he wondered, near breathless. Rhiannon swallowed hard. "The Vitraxis accelerates healing and genetic bonding. Our synergy might have catalyzed it further. This is uncharted territory." For several heartbeats, they simply stared at one another, grappling with the enormity of it all. The kiosk pulsed softly, as if confirming its own revelation. In the distance, the base groaned under the stress of imminent meltdown, the walls shuddering with the threat of annihilation. But in that small chamber, Ethan and Rhiannon felt a profound hush settle over them. Ethan spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have to survive. For us, for..." He couldn't quite finish the sentence. The idea that he was about to be a father on a shattered alien planet in the midst of a war was too enormous to articulate. Rhiannon nodded, eyes glistening with conflicting emotions. Through their bond, Ethan sensed her fierce protectiveness awakening, melding with her warrior spirit. This child was a living symbol of everything that had once seemed impossible, a direct fusion of human and Lyran life. And now the Dranids, the meltdown. Everything threatened this fragile hope. A distant explosion rattled the sublevel, snapping them back to the present danger. Rhiannon took a steadying breath, exhaling resolve. "We need that ship, now." They killed the kiosk's power, no point leaving a trail, and stepped back into the corridor. Their synergy thrummed with fresh determination, each step guided by the knowledge that they were no longer fighting for just themselves. Now there was a third heartbeat, faint but very real, pulsing through their interconnected senses. Despite the adrenaline coursing through them, they approached the next corridor with caution. Smoke seeped from ruptured vents, and the overhead lighting flickered dangerously. Ethan's visor displayed temperature spikes and oxygen depletion zones. In short, the meltdown was accelerating. Soon the entire base would become a death trap. They followed the map's route, making split-second decisions whenever rubble or collapsed sections forced detours. Twice, they had to engage draw-need patrols in lethal bursts of combat. Each time, their combined reflexes ensured swift victories. Rhiannon's blade cut through chitin armor, while Ethan's plasma rifle found vulnerable junctions. After each skirmish, they paused to check if their unborn child was unaffected by the stress. Amazingly, the synergy told them the tiny presence was still stable, though every pulse of Rhiannon's racing heart seemed to jolt it. Finally, they reached a sealed bulkhead door, marked with a swirling Lyran crest. Beyond lay the auxiliary hangar. If the schematics were correct. The door's panel flickered with faint power. Rhiannon keyed in a code and the heavy metal slid aside with a groan. The chamber beyond was surprisingly intact, lit by emergency lights. In the center rested a slender craft with angular lines in a crystalline canopy. The Starstrike. Its surfaces bore a blend of earth alloy plating and Lyran energy conduits, a testament to the joint engineering that was once promised to unite their species. Ethan's breath caught in awe. It's gorgeous. Rhiannon allowed herself a small, relieved smile. It's our way out. She turned to him, blade still glowing in her hand. We just have to hope it has enough power to break atmosphere, and that the meltdown doesn't take us all before then. Steam vents hissed around the auxiliary hangar, and each hiss felt like the ticking hand of a countdown clock. Sergeant Ethan Drake could practically feel the base's meltdown drawing closer by the minute. He and Rhiannon Lore stepped cautiously across the metal floor panels, the clang of their boots echoing in the cavernous space. Above them, the overhead lights buzzed, threatening to wink out at any second. The Starstrike transport crouched in the center like a sleeping predator, sleek lines, reinforced plating, and the faint turquoise glow of Lyran energy conduits illuminating its belly. Nudging a toppled crate aside, Ethan approached the ship's rear ramp. Along the hull, near the cargo entry, were markings in both Lyran script and Earth Standard block letters. Stenciled near an auxiliary port, the words read Project Unity, a code name he vaguely recalled from briefing files, rumored to be the first serious attempt to merge Lyran psionics with Earth's jump drive technology. Now that rumor was the closest thing they had to salvation. Rhiannon's grip on her energy blade slackened as she scanned the craft for possible breaches. Through their synergy, Ethan sensed her mingled awe and urgency, awe yet seeing her people's advanced engineering fuse with Earth's design, an urgency in remembering they had mere minutes before the meltdown reached critical mass. It's sealed, her mental voice told him. We'll have to power it up from within. Ethan unlatched a recessed panel by the main hatch, tapping commands into a half-lit control screen. After a nerve-wracking pause, the transport's hydraulics whirred to life. The ramp lowered with a groan, revealing a dimly lit interior. He exchanged a glance with Rhiannon, both acknowledging that this was, quite literally, a one-shot gamble. If the ship lacked sufficient power or had suffered internal damage, they would be trapped with no time to find an alternative. They ascended into the Starstrike's cargo hold, a space cramped with racks for weapons and supplies. Here, the design was decidedly Lyran. Smooth metal compartments integrated with crystalline panels. Half the crystals flickered ominously, evidence of partial system failures. A wave of dread swelled through their synergy, especially when they saw that some of the compartments had been ransacked, presumably by dronids searching for salvage. Loose wires dangled from the ceiling, and sparks arced from a torn conduit in the corner. This is where Earth's jump drive was supposed to be installed, Ethan noted softly, scanning a partially exposed frame near the center of the hold. He saw the Earth insignia scuffed but intact on a squat rectangular device that looked like a thick generator. We have to hope the dranids didn't remove or fry it. Rhiannon nodded, sliding into the cockpit passageway. Her steps were quick, purposeful. Through the synergy, Ethan felt her maternal protectiveness flaring again. The new life within her was an urgent reminder that time was not on their side. The meltdown was only part of it. Dranid stragglers could arrive at any moment. The faint scuttling noises overhead reminded them that the facility's unstable structure might give the invaders additional points of entry. Stepping through a narrow doorway, they found themselves in the cockpit, a compact two-seat configuration ringed with glowing interfaces. The pilot's chair had a harness designed for a Lyran's slender frame, while the co-pilot's seat looked more like an Earth standard. Swathes of shimmering text scrolled across the wraparound displays, partial boot sequences, system checks, and lines of code that merged two distinct alphabets in dizzying patterns. Rhiannon slid into the pilot's chair. The console recognized her presence, flickering from red error messages to cautious green prompts. She raised a brow at Ethan, gesturing for him to occupy the co-pilot's seat. If this really is a joint engineered craft, it may need both of us to bring it fully online, she said aloud, though he also caught the mental echo of her apprehension. He settled into the seat, adjusting the harness. A series of holographic controls lit up, each labeled in both Earth Standard and stylized Lyran runes. Using the synergy, he probed for the correct commands, and it felt almost second nature, like a half-remembered dream guiding his fingertips. The console responded with a musical chime, and the overhead displays brightened, indicating partial power restoration. Power cells at 37%, Ethan read off, tapping the readouts. That's enough for short flight, maybe atmospheric exit, but not enough for a full subspace jump. Looks like the meltdown knocked out auxiliary feeds that were supposed to recharge these cells. Rhiannon's jaw tightened. We only need to breach orbit and signal for help. The Lyran scout fleet might still be near the outer system, or Earth reinforcements could be en route. He nodded, though worry coiled in his gut. They had no direct proof that anyone was on the way. For all they knew, the rest of the war front had shifted light years away, leaving Arcturus 9 as a forsaken battlefield. But we have to try, he thought, letting that resolve strengthen her own through their link. System after system sputtered to life. Ethan's console displayed thruster diagnostics, shield integrity, a meager 40%, and hull pressure readouts. Rhiannon's station was more complicated. Lyran flight matrice laced with psionic interface modules. She ran her hands over the delicate, crystal-inlaid controls, and Ethan felt a curious tingle race along his forearms. Their synergy recognized the starship's psionic architecture, bridging the gap between them and the machine. A soft hum reverberated through the hull as the Starstrike's engines spun up. The cockpit lights stabilized, and the overhead displays resolved into crisp readouts. Navigational software is partially functional, Rhiannon announced, her voice tinged with cautious excitement. We'll have to do a manual takeoff if the guidance is fried, but it's doable. They heard a muffled crash echo from somewhere beyond the hangar doors, a reminder that Dronids were still prowling this base. The meltdown sirens, once faint, began a shrill crescendo, an unmistakable signal that time was all but spent. We need to open the main hangar doors, Ethan said, toggling external cameras. Static glitched across the display, but he could see giant metal shutters latched over the exterior ramp. Rhiannon paused, her gaze flicking from the controls to Ethan. We might have to override that from the hangar control panel outside. There's a chance the meltdown has locked them down automatically. He swallowed. Leaving the ship to fiddle with manual releases sounded suicidal, especially with Dronids skulking about. But if the meltdown forced the hangar doors into emergency lockdown, the Starstrike wouldn't be going anywhere. We'll do it together, he suggested, unbuckling from the co-pilot's chair. This synergy might help us fix the panel faster than the Dranids can react. She nodded, steeling herself. Before they stood, her hand drifted momentarily to her abdomen, and Ethan felt the wave of protective determination surge through her again. Let's make it quick. Stepping back into the hangar, they found the environment dramatically changed. The meltdown warnings triggered emergency lighting that bathed the space in a red, pulsing glow. The ceiling shuddered under the strain of failing structural supports, and rivulets of dust rained down with each ominous tremor. A scoreboard of the planet's demise ticked away in Ethan's mind. Any minute, the reactor would hit critical mass, converting this entire base into a radioactive inferno. They rushed to the control station built into a metal dais beside the enormous hangar doors. The console flickered erratically, glitching between partial readouts and blackouts. Looks like the meltdown took out half the circuits, Ethan muttered, typing furiously on the panel's keyboard. A tangle of cables snaked below, some severed by shrapnel. This end has Lyran subroutines, Rhiannon said, kneeling to pry open a side compartment. Through their synergy, Ethan could sense her scanning the lines of code with mental eyes, interpreting the patterns of neon script. We can bypass the damaged protocols if we fuse the Earth and Lyran command lines. The meltdown safety locks are clashing with the standard override. He nodded, his heart pounding like a war drum. Focus, he told himself, letting her knowledge merge with his. They each set to work on separate aspects of the console, bridging Earth's mechanical logic with Lyran's psionic-coded architecture. A bizarre sort of mental dance ensued. When Rhiannon paused at an unfamiliar Earth subroutine, Ethan stepped in, toggling it to a safe mode. When Ethan stumbled upon a cryptic Lyran psionic handshake, Rhiannon recalibrated it through their link. Alarms continued to wail, and the lights flashed frenetically. The overhead monitor showed reactor meltdown at 92%. A short distance away, something metallic crashed to the floor, sending sparks flying. Dim silhouettes shifted on the far side of the hangar, near a stack of broken crates. The Dronids had arrived, drawn by the sounds of the ramping meltdown or by some last-minute desire to claim spoils. Ethan's fingers tapped in the final override command. Almost there, he whispered mentally. Just then a hiss from behind forced them both to spin around. Two Dronid soldiers emerged from the shadows, their insectoid forms jerking forward on jointed legs. One carried a crackling plasma spear. The other leveled a shard rifle that glowed with lethal energy. No time for subtlety. Rhiannon dropped the cables and flared her energy blade to life. She leapt in a single fluid motion, slicing across the Dronid with the spear before it could fully raise its weapon. The second warrior fired a volley of green shards, deadly flechettes that whistled through the air. Through the mod, Ethan felt Rhiannon's heightened reflexes flood his limbs, and he dropped to one knee, lifting his rifle in a swift counterstrike. His shot burst through the Dronid's thorax, splattering phosphorescent fluids across the floor. Panting, they turned back to the control panel. A triumphant beep signaled the command had taken. With a groan, the massive hangar doors began to unlatch, metal gears grinding in protest. "We did it," Ethan said, heart hammering. But as the doors rose inch by inch, a new wave of Dronids scrambled into view from the corridor behind them. 5, maybe 6, each brandishing lethal armaments. "Get to the ship!" Rhiannon shouted, her voice cracking over the klaxon. She pivoted to intercept the nearest Dronid, blade humming in a brilliant arc that severed the creature's rifle. Without pausing, she slammed an armored elbow into its face, sending it sprawling. 2 more lunged forward, mandibles clacking, and Ethan squeezed off plasma bursts that lit up the gloom with searing flashes. Through their synergy, each saw the battlefield from dual perspectives. Rhiannon glimpsed Ethan's steady aim, taking out a Dronid that tried to flank her. Ethan felt Rhiannon's acute spatial awareness, guiding him to pivot at the right moment and fire at just the right angle. The combined effect was devastating. They moved like a single entity, covering each other's blind spots, weaving between enemy strikes, and cutting down the advancing horde with terrifying efficiency. Still, the Dronids kept coming. More silhouettes skittered in the corridor, drawn by the fight, or perhaps by desperation now that the meltdown was imminent. The floor quaked so violently that cracks began to race along the walls. In the overhead gloom, a girder tore free and crashed onto the hangar floor, sending shrapnel flying. A chunk of debris slammed into Ethan's left shoulder, knocking him off balance. Pain flared through their arena. Rhiannon hissed in sympathetic response, spinning around to slash at a Dronid that rushed for him, and she kicked another aside, but the momentary distraction allowed a scuttling Dronid to leap from the shadows. Its chitinous limbs wrapped around her waist, jaws snapping at her helmet. Ethan, wincing, ignored the pain in his shoulder. Lifting his rifle, he unleashed a short, controlled burst. The shots tore the creature free of Rhiannon, leaving it in a smoking heap. She stumbled back, gasping for breath, but nodded thanks through their link. "We can't hold them off forever." Behind them, the hangar doors had opened enough for the Star Strike to slip through, if they could reach it. Another explosion from deep in the base rattled the ceiling, and a spray of sparks shot out as more supports buckled. The meltdown was nearly at a point of no return. Any second, the reactor's chain reaction could detonate. "Go," Ethan ordered, nodding toward the ship. He fired a volley at the Dranids to buy Rhiannon time. She sprinted up the Star Strike's ramp, scanning the area for additional threats. Then she paused at the threshold, turning back with fierce urgency. Ethan backed away from the writhing horde, picking off any that ventured too close. Plasma blasts pinged off chitin, leaving sizzling wounds. But for every Draenei that fell, another climbed over the body, driven by either mindless aggression or last-ditch survival instincts. Their alien eyes flashed with primal fury in the strobing red light. He dashed toward the ramp. The Draenids hissed, a guttural chorus, and one leapt forward to swipe at his leg with a barbed forelimb. Rhiannon's voice thundered in his head. "Duck!" And he did, feeling the vicious limb whistle over his helmet. He retaliated with a crushing butt stroke of his rifle, caving the creature's exoskeleton. Limping slightly, Ethan reached the ramp. Rhiannon yanked him aboard and the hydraulic door began to seal. Draenids crashed against the closing metal, their claws scraping in a maddened frenzy, but the ship's reinforced hatch held. "Hang on," Rhiannon said, sprinting back to the cockpit. "We're taking off now." Ethan staggered into the co-pilot's seat, adrenaline coursing through every cell. His left shoulder throbbed where the debris had struck, but he pushed the pain aside. The synergy between them seemed to thrum with fear and hope in equal measure. Rhiannon slid into the pilot's chair, engaged the thrusters, and the Star Strike trembled beneath them, humming with raw power. Using half-intuitive knowledge gleaned from their bond, she realigned the flight matrix. Ethan prepped the atmospheric stabilizers from his console. A swirl of half-Earth, half-Lyran data danced across their screens. Damage readouts, external pressure levels, meltdown countdown indicators. "The meltdown is at 97%, Ethan announced, his voice tight. "We might get one shot to clear the hangar before everything goes." Rhiannon exhaled slowly, steadying her hands on the controls. "Then let's hope this hybrid tech can handle a vertical ascent at full burn." She tapped the throttle. The engines roared, intensifying to a shrill pitch that rattled the hull. Outside, the metal deck of the hangar began to buckle, and cracks spiderwebbed across the floors. "Hangar doors are open," Ethan confirmed, checking the camera feed. Through the swirling dust and strobe lights, he could see a narrow path to the sky, a bleak, ash-gray sky marred by rising smoke. "Punch it!" Rhiannon yanked back on the control sticks. The Star Strike vibrated violently, as if resisting the sudden thrust. For an agonizing moment, Ethan feared the meltdown's chaos had pinned them in place. But then the craft lurched upward, scraping the hangar floor in a shower of sparks before clearing the threshold. The external camera showed twisted girders collapsing behind them, burying the Draenids who had tried to storm the ramp. Up they soared, the battered hangar falling away below. Ethan's stomach lurched under the G-forces, and he braced himself, checking that the life support systems were functioning. The synergy flared as Rhiannon poured every ounce of psionic impetus into stabilizing the flight. Through their bond, Ethan felt her fear for the child, that the chaotic takeoff might harm the delicate life growing within her. He silently transmitted reassurance, focusing on making each system run smoother. Suddenly, a massive shockwave rippled from the base beneath them. With a final gut-wrenching roar, the meltdown triggered the reactor's detonation. It felt as though the planet itself was convulsing, sending up a fiery bloom of ash and debris. The Star Strike jolted hard, almost toppling sideways. Rhiannon wrestled with the controls, her knuckles white. Ethan monitored the stabilizers, adjusting them with frantic swipes. "Brace for shockwave," he shouted. A rolling tsunami of energy slammed into them, flipping the craft into a wild spin. Out of the cockpit viewports, Ethan saw a horizon of blackened smoke and raging flame. It looked like the apocalypse made real. The engines whined in protest and warning klaxons shrieked. But Rhiannon's grip held firm. The synergy let her anticipate each tumble and roll as if seeing the future. She angled the nose upward, firing the maneuvering thrusters in carefully timed bursts. Ethan matched her moves at the co-pilot station, realigning the jump drive capacitors to push the engines harder without blowing them out. Slowly, agonizingly, the Star Strike recovered from the spin and leveled off. With a final thrust, they broke the low-hanging smoke, emerging into clearer skies. The endless wreckage of Arcturus 9 stretched below like a wasteland, the meltdown's epicenter still glowing with malignant fire. Rhiannon's chest heaved, and Ethan felt her relief mingling with his own. Against all odds, they were airborne. Now came the next challenge, escaping the planet's atmosphere on barely sufficient power. The Star Strike soared over ravaged landscapes, dodging columns of black smoke that rose like twisted pillars. Arcturus Nine's upper atmosphere was notoriously turbulent, but the meltdown's shockwaves made conditions even more unpredictable. Ethan checked the sensors, alarmed to see a cluster of Dronid fighter signatures climbing on an intercept course. They must have launched from their own forward base, he muttered, locking eyes with Rhiannon. Their synergy transmitted the same grim realization. They hadn't escaped the war zone just yet. Are we able to engage any defensive systems? Rhiannon scowled at the flickering displays. Shields are at minimal capacity, weapon banks offline. We might have a single dorsal turret, but I doubt it's operational. The Dronid fighters soon came into visual range on the external monitors, sleek black silhouettes cutting through the smoky sky. Ethan's console beeped with target lock warnings. The synergy flared with a spike of fear and determination. They had to protect not only themselves but the fragile life now intertwining their genes. A single Dronid vessel swooped in, firing a volley of glowing bolts. Rhiannon jerked the controls, banking the Star Strike hard to starboard. The craft shuddered from partial hits, and Ethan saw the shield integrity plummet from 40% down to 20%. Sparks erupted behind the cockpit as a console overloaded. Ethan hammered at the weapon station. One turret is responding, but the targeting array is scrambled. I'll have to aim manually. Do it! Rhiannon angled the ship to give him the best line of fire she could, though the Dronid fighters deftly swooped in and out of the smoky clouds. Ethan's synergy with Rhiannon extended into the ship's psionic interface, letting him sense subtle changes in their flight path. He mentally predicted the Dronid's next pass, aligning the turret with a trembling hand. When one fighter strafed across their bow, Ethan thumbed the trigger. A burst of Earth-Lyran hybrid bolts streaked out, catching the Dronid craft under its wing. It erupted in a fiery spiral. Nice shot, Rhiannon shouted, but 3 more fighters remained. They closed in from behind, peppering the Star Strike with punishing blasts that rattled the hull. Smoke poured from a ruptured panel in the cargo hold. A shrill alarm indicated hull fractures forming. Ethan pushed the turret to swivel aft, but the system glitched. Another searing hit slammed them from above, forcing Rhiannon to dive lower to maintain control. Gritting his teeth, Ethan tried rerouting the turret's feed through a Lyran subroutine. Let the synergy guide me, he told himself. A moment later, the turret responded, albeit sluggishly. Below them, the battered planet's surface rushed past in a blur of craters and scorched structures. Through the synergy, Ethan felt Rhiannon's desperation. They needed altitude, or they'd never break orbit. Yet the Draenids swarmed like vultures, preventing a clean climb. Hold steady, he urged, relocking manual aim on the nearest enemy. The crosshairs danced across the screen, and for an instant, he felt Rhiannon's heartbeat align with his own. He fired. A second Dronid fighter exploded. The concussion blast knocked the other 2 off kilter, buying a sliver of time. Now! Rhiannon wrenched back on the flight stick, engine screaming at full burn. The Star Strike shot upward into the swirling cloud layer. A wave of turbulence buffeted them, but they emerged above it, momentarily free of direct line of sight from the enemy. We need to break Atmo before they can regroup. With engines nearly at redline, the Star Strike climbed, the altimeter ticking ever higher. Arcturus 9's stratosphere glowed an eerie orange-red from the meltdown's aftershock, and lumps of particulate matter drifted in the thinning air. Ethan glanced at the sensor array. The Dronid fighters were regrouping below, likely plotting an intercept course, but the cloud cover gave them a brief advantage. He diverted all remaining shell power to the forward deflectors, hoping to stave off at least one more barrage. Next to him, Rhiannon's face shone with sweat under her helmet. Keep going, he sent through their on, letting her feel the conviction that they had to protect their unborn child at all costs. She acknowledged with a fierce nod, pushing the throttle to maximum. The craft rattled, metal groaning in protest. More alarms shrieked, notifying them of engine overheating and structural stress. One last Dronid fighter roared into view at their flank, trying to line up a shot. Ethan twisted in his seat, swinging the turret around. The synergy heightened his reflexes once more, and he squeezed off a volley. The Dronid pilot fired at the same time, beams scything across the Star Strike's upper plating. The enemy fighter disintegrated in a brilliant flash, but the Star Strike suffered critical hits along its dorsal armor. A cacophony of warnings erupted, and Rhiannon struggled to keep the ship level. We've got hull breaches. Engine output dropping, she cried, hands flying over the controls. Through their mental connection, Ethan felt her body tremble with the effort of channeling the ship's flight modules and protecting the child within her womb. Don't black out on me, Ethan pleaded silently, funneling his own energy into the synergy. He used the Lyran-coded subroutines to stabilize the power flow, bridging them with Earth's digital safeties. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared back to life. The star strike surged forward again, cresting the final layers of atmosphere. Star-speckled blackness beckoned above, but just as they cleared the planet's gravitational pull, the meltdown's full force erupted below. A wave of electromagnetic disturbance rippled through space, rattling their ship with an invisible hammer. Lights flickered, and the jump drive reactor threatened to shut down entirely. Ethan felt the synergy twist with confusion. Some external force pounded their electronics. Flickering readouts showed intense radiation from the meltdown's aftershock. If it fully enveloped them, they'd drift helplessly in orbit, radiation washing over them. Rhiannon's gaze darted between the failing monitors. We have to get clear of the planet's blast radius. She angled the star strike away, but the thrusters coughed again, half scorched from the final exchange of fire. By all logic, they shouldn't be able to accelerate enough to outrun the radiation wave. We have to try, Ethan told her, letting desperation bleed into resolve. And then something unexpected happened. The synergy flared to life with new intensity, as if responding to the mortal danger. A comforting warmth filled Ethan's chest, mirrored by Rhiannon's. He glimpsed images that seemed to emanate from their unborn child, flickers of possibility, a swirling tapestry of Earth Lyran energies, and the vague shape of a protective shell that might shield them from the cosmic storm. In the cockpit, luminous arcs of energy danced across the consoles, bridging circuits, stabilizing the jump drive in a final improbable burst. Rhiannon and Ethan both gasped, overwhelmed by the feeling that their child, this miraculous fusion of two species, was lending them a power neither species could wield alone. The engine surged one last time. The Star Strike punched forward, leaving Arcturus 9 behind in a swirl of chaos and flame. Through the viewport, they watched the meltdown's radiation wave expand below, but it fell behind them, losing the race. They were free. Moments turned into minutes, minutes into hours. As they drifted through the blackness of space, engines reduced to a flicker of life, the meltdown-ravaged planet below growing smaller and smaller. Rhiannon guided the Star Strike into a stable orbit, scanning for any sign of friendly forces. All the while, the synergy pulsed between them with a gentle glow, no longer driven by the urgency of combat, but by the quiet awe of survival and the presence of a tiny heartbeat linking them together. Finally, a faint ping on the sensors signaled the approach of a craft. The onboard transponder recognized an Earth frigate signature first, then another from a Lyran cruiser. The synergy allowed Ethan to interpret the signals quickly. It was a joint task force, presumably sent to assess Arcturus 9's catastrophic meltdown and search for any survivors. Relief hit them both like a physical blow. They were not alone. Within the hour, rescue shuttles from both Earth and Lyran vessels converged on the Star Strike. Ethan and Rhiannon watched with mixed emotions as docking clamps latched onto their battered craft and medical teams flooded in. Human medics in drab green uniforms hurried forward, scanning for injuries, while Lyran healers carried crystalline diagnostic tools. Neither side knew exactly what to make of Ethan Drake and Rhiannon Lore, two battered soldiers who had somehow escaped the meltdown together. During a debriefing in a cramped medical bay aboard the Earth frigate Valiant Star, Admiral Hastings of the Earth Alliance and High Sentinel Verenia of the Lyran fleet stared in stunned silence as the story unfolded. Ethan explained how he found Rhiannon paralyzed on the battlefield, how they'd used the Vitraxis chamber, then fought their way through the base until meltdown forced their escape. Rhiannon confirmed every detail, though she omitted the more intimate aspects of how their synergy truly felt. But nothing could be omitted about the unborn child. Lyran bioscanners immediately detected the presence of a nascent life form, a hybrid that should not have been possible. The healers were in hushed awe, whispering about how the Vitraxis synergy had defied every established protocol. The Earth medics merely stood in wide-eyed astonishment. Admiral Hastings removed his cap, running a hand over his thinning hair. I've heard rumors of cross-species attempts before, They never succeeded, and to do it under battlefield conditions, his voice trailed off, unable to articulate the enormity of Ethan. High Sentinel Verenia, her skin rippling with the distinctive silver flush of Lyran shock, said quietly, "This is unprecedented. A new life, embodying the unity our peoples have struggled to achieve for decades." Exhausted, Ethan looked at Rhiannon. She gazed back with steady resolve, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Through their bond, he felt the child's presence, still faint, still fragile, but undeniably alive. The synergy whispered that this was more than just a personal milestone. It was a moment that could reshape alliances, tilt the war, and inspire hope in a galaxy ravaged by conflict. Rhiannon held her head high. "Our child exists," she said, her voice firm. "We will protect it, but we also want to see our peoples move beyond mere necessity. We want genuine cooperation, born of mutual respect. If two warring species can find a reason for peace in a single heartbeat, then perhaps that's reason enough to try." In the hush that followed, Ethan could practically hear the swirling possibility. Despite everything they had endured, the meltdown, the Dronid assault, the near-fatal synergy experiment, a singular truth remained. Life had found a way, forging a bridge where none had existed before. And in that bridge lay the promise of a future where humans and Lyrans, once strangers in a hostile galaxy, could stand together not just as allies, but as family. Looking back on this incredible saga, I see a powerful message shining through. When we bridge our differences, be they biological, cultural, or otherwise, we unlock possibilities that once seemed unthinkable. Sergeant Ethan Drake's stubborn courage paired with Rhiannon Lore's noble determination gave birth to more than just a groundbreaking alliance. It opened a path toward genuine compassion between species once at odds. From my perspective, this story celebrates the resilience of hope. Even in a war-torn galaxy and on a dying planet, new life and cooperation emerged in the most unlikely way. This shows that where there's trust and shared resolve, miracles can happen, even bending the boundaries of genetics and technology. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stands out most in this story. Was it the planetary meltdown, the Dronid threat, or the cross-species bond? Please share your comments and insights below, and let's keep this conversation going.